just to set the tone for a presentation today, I have to say that personally, I've always been really interested and fascinated by the climate work at the level of the UN, United Nations, and I'm very thrilled that today two researchers accepted to join me to have that conversation and talk about the work they're doing in the climate field. And also they'll introduce some work they do, some project they do here at Railroads University, and they will also answer some of my questions about, the hope and challenges we're facing now in the current situation. And they will answer that by presenting on their projects and research for sure. And also will answer some of your questions as we go. And I also want them to maybe talk a little bit about the work they do at Railroads and also how the students get involved, because I know many of you are prospective students asking for a question of why will I join Railroads. So hopefully you get a bit of everything today, insight on COP30 and also insight on Railroads University. So my name is Nancy Prévost-Maurice. I'm an education specialist here at Railroads. I'm also a graduate of the Climate Action Leadership Master a few years back. Very grateful to be here with Julie McArthur, if you want to wave, Rob Newell as well, hello, and Rhett is the school manager of the School of Environment and Sustainability, and will talk with you all in a few minutes. You have been muted, but you can always use the chat. You can have your video on or off. It's up to you. But I would love you to take a minute to introduce you in the chat. Maybe if you already have questions. I know some folks have said that you went to COP yourself before. So feel free to share a little bit about yourself in the chat as we go through the session today. And this is recorded, so we'll send the recording in a few days. And I'll move here. As we get started today, I invite us to maybe take a deep breath, really grounding our feet on the floor here and acknowledging the lands that we're on. So very important to acknowledge the indigenous land that we are on. Here at Railroads University, we are on the unceded land of the Lagwagon-speaking people, known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation. And of course, it's with deep gratitude that we learn, play, study, work all together, where the future, past and present of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people come together. And if you know the Indigenous lands you're joining us from, please enter that in the chat. It's always fascinating to learn about all the various communities across Canada and across the world. The agenda for today, just a brief introduction as I'm doing now. Thank you. I see people popping information in the chat. That's amazing. I'll talk really briefly about Railroads University. Rhett will talk about the School of Environment and Sustainability. We'll have a fascinating discussion with Julie and Rob, and then we'll answer any question you have. So I hope that makes sense for you. You can give me a thumbs up. That's true. You can use your emoji as well. So if you like, you can use a heart, thumbs up. We want the session to be dynamic. And as I talk here, I just want to show some people are coming from abroad, so that's amazing. Welcome. I think for some of you it's quite late at night. Just so you know where Victoria is located. So we're here on that beautiful little Vancouver Island, and the two main cities are Vancouver and Seattle, who are only a few hours away. But beautiful place. We have the mildest climate in Canada. And of course, I'm from Quebec, as you can hear with the French accent. So I'm very grateful to live here now and skip winter. And carrying a diverse community, I really like that slide. So that gives you kind of an overview of Railroad, beautiful network of alumni, students, people from across 108 countries come to Railroads, and 70% of Railroad students are pursuing graduate studies and degrees. So you'll hear about it today, but that's quite fascinating. And we are an institution for working professionals. So everyone I see in the room today, you're all kind of at that age maybe of you want to level up your career or you want to pivot and do something else. And I think the caring I really like, because that will be related to the discussion today, because I think in climate, there's a lot of things we can do at the local level, as we know, but also in a caring way with each other and the planet. Inspiring people with the courage to transform the world. This is kind of our motto, I think, or our mantra maybe. And I really like it because, of course, it's about you. It's about who you want to become, who you are, and who you want to become in the world. There's so much to do in this world, so I hope that you can find something that resonates with you today. And we are also an Ashoka U Changemaker campus, and this is super important because only a few institutions in North America got that designation. So it's all about, of course, change making. It's all about innovation, social interaction, and really learning from each other and all the amazing research that we do. So I think that's enough of me. I'll just pass it quickly to Rhett if you want to talk about the programs we have.
Hi, thanks Nancy, and yeah, thanks for having me here today. And yeah, I'll just take a minute, quick minute here to chat about some of the programs in School of Environment, since it is of fairly topical interest to the discussion today, and realizing that people are here for the discussion, so I won't take too long. But yeah, I just want to chat quickly about some of the programs we offer in the School of Environment. We have a Master of Arts and Science in Environment and Management. That program, we have a fully on-campus offering of that program, and we have a blended offering of that program. So people can take that one from a distance, mostly online, coming to campus for some on-campus residencies. We have a Master of Arts in Environmental Education and Communication. So we have a lot of educators, a lot of teachers who like to take that program to sort of up their skills and some of their knowledge in the environmental field to bring into the classroom and other educational arenas. That's a blended delivery as well, online and on campus. And then we have a Master of Science in Environmental Practice. That one is fully online for those folks wanting to get the master's degree and they can't really maybe get away from work, or they can't make the trek up to Victoria for on-campus learning. That one is fully online. So that's a good option for people as well. And I can't quite see the bottom now. Okay, yeah, Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies. So yeah, that is also some students from our school take courses in School of Environment as a portion of their learning in the Masters of Interdisciplinary Studies. And then next slide, please, Nancy. And then in addition to the master's program, we also have some diplomas and certificates at the graduate level. The Environmental Education and Communication program offers a diploma for those not wanting to do the full master's. And then we also have certificates in environmental education and communication in our Science and Policy of Climate Change program and the Regenerative Sustainable Community Development certificate. So those are some more kind of shorter duration programming, taking a few courses at the certificate level, maybe several courses at the diploma level. And each of these can sort of build into a full master's at some point if students want to sort of take that option. And then we also have bachelor's level programming. We have our environmental science program, which has been going on for a long time, one of the original programs at the university. So that's a completion option, a years 3 and 4 completion for students who have maybe completed years 1 and 2 somewhere else and they want to take that full degree, they can come here and do that. There's a compressed program taking years 3 and 4 in 1 year. So if you're interested in getting done in a hurry, that's an option. We also have an environmental practice program. And again, that one is fully online. So for students who can't make it to campus for on-campus learning, fully online option for that. So happy to chat about any of those programs. If you have questions, pop them in the chat. I can get back to you at some point. I'm also an alumni myself of the Masters of Environmental Management program, had a great experience. So happy to chat about my experience as a student in the program. I can share my contact information and we can connect. So with that, I'll pass it back to Nancy and on to the interesting discussion today. Thanks.
Really lovely. Thank you, Rhett. Yeah, and I hope you'll be bombarded with questions. That's what we love. And of course, I didn't really introduce Rob and Julie because they will do so by themselves. I think if I have to read their bio, I'll have 15 minutes because, oh my God, you two do so much. And as we get started with our discussion, I just saw online today that Antonio Guterres, from the UN Secretary General, the UN Secretary General, I should say, posted something about COP30 that might spark a little bit our discussion too. He mentioned the last 10 years have been the hottest in history. Ocean heat is breaking records. No country is safe from extreme weather events. At COP30, countries must deliver bold new national climate action plans to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And I think we chatted about it yesterday, and I'm very interested and happy that I'll hear from you too. So I'll pass it, I think, to you, Rob, first with your slides.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And hello, everyone. I'm Rob Newell. I'm the Canada Research Chair in Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Sustainability at Royal Roads. That's a fairly large umbrella and long title. So I'll just give you a sense of what I do exactly. My area of focus is in the area of integrated planning and policy. So what that means is I work with communities and often really at that local or regional level, work with communities, NGOs, local governments, regional governments, and other actors to figure out not just how to do climate change, but how to do climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, um, in understanding how they fit and interact with a whole variety of social, environmental, and economic perspectives and objectives and values. So that's kind of the idea of integrated planning. It's kind of understanding these things like individual strategies and objectives and their alignment, both the co-benefits and trade-offs with other strategies and objectives, and work with a lot of practical tools, experimental tools to try and help out communities trying to think about these types of things, how to do integrated planning. And what you see up here is an image of visualizations, which I'll talk about in a couple slides. So these are realistic visualizations that help people think about different ways to develop their communities and implement certain development and management strategies. Next slide, please. One thing that is important to understand about the type of work that I do is I do a lot of systems thinking work. So this idea of, once again, going with the example of when I'm talking to communities about how to do different climate action strategies, and think about them in terms of how they link, how they align or conflict with a whole variety of other objectives. This requires thinking in terms of systems, thinking of how these strategies and objectives link and interact in complex ways. So what you're looking at right here is just an example of these types of things that we do for systems approaches in this realm of integrated planning. What this involves is a lot of systems mapping and modeling. So in this particular case, what you're kind of looking at is interactions and intersections between biodiversity objectives and climate change objectives, and these ideas of these different strategies that you see in the blue nodes and potential outcomes for the strategies. How do these different strategies interact with one another in terms of different strategies perhaps converging and coming out with the same types of outcomes or contributing to the same kind of outcomes, or strategies in conflict and causing tensions between different goals and objectives? Next slide, please. The type of work that I do is through this community gauge research approach. So I use participatory research work and approaches, which means that I will work with communities and non-governmental organizations, local governments, to try and figure out how to develop tools for supporting integrated planning. And often it kind of follows this like really loose formula of the three phases. The first phase is around identifying the problems, the things of value, and the strategies that they might want to explore. So that's basically what it comes down to. It's an identification phase. We might be talking about a variety of different things like climate change and biodiversity issues related to food systems, transportation, the built environment, that sort of thing. But ultimately, that's the idea. I talk with communities and say through techniques like participatory systems modeling, spatial mapping, other workshop techniques, we figure out what are the things that you value in your community and you want to enhance and preserve for the future. What are the challenges that you're concerned about that are threatening these values and causing risks? And then what sort of strategies do you want to look at to explore how to enhance and preserve the values and address the challenges? And then the phase two is sort of our value added phase. And in phase two, what we often do, will do analysis. So this involves things like systems modeling. It could involve qualitative analysis, GIS analysis. Basically, what we're trying to do is show communities that if you take or apply a certain strategy, these are the projected or anticipated outcomes of one strategy. So it kind of gives them that sort of like a bit of an understanding of what will be the possible outcomes of taking one path or another. And then phase three is this application phase. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we become more resilient in the face of climate change? How do we meet some local climate change objectives? And this phase requires creating tools that can, effectively communicate some of this complex information back to the local community members, local governments, and NGOs. And these tools involve things like interactive maps, interactive systems models, and also these sort of things like realistic visualizations that allow people to look at scenarios from this first-person perspective. Next slide, please. I just want to briefly talk about these visualizations. So this is a visualization project that we did in Revelstoke, where we're looking kind of long-term futures about how local food systems can change in the face of a changing climate and other possible tensions and shocks, like things that come from geopolitical issues and economic decline, that sort of thing. What we're looking at is we looked at a variety of different configurations around food systems, and we provided an analytical approach to it. So we use things like, kind of systems mapping and systems analysis and qualitative analysis. And then we also created these tools. So give people a sense of what these futures look like if we redesigned food systems and approached local food systems in different ways, local food systems planning in different ways. How would this make us more resilient in terms of, increasing climate change? How might this contribute to other objectives around local food security, local economies, and so forth? And these scenarios, or these visualizations, are quite useful in terms of being able to give people a sense of what these places might look and feel like if implemented in the real world. So they don't do everything. They don't do things in terms of necessarily like showing, for instance, the greenhouse gas emissions calculations around land use and that sort of thing. But what they do is they gauge people in terms of their sense of place and, their kind of feelings around whether a place has livability. So I'd say they're like a complementary tool in the whole suite of tools that we use for allowing people to think about different futures in the face of this ever-growing climate crisis. And, speaking to what we're going to talk about today, the geopolitical complications, to say the least, about how we're going to, as a world, engage and try and tackle the climate crisis. All right, thank you. And that's it for me for this little round.
That's wonderful. And Rob, I had a question, and then someone asked me the same question, so I must ask it. How
Sure.
long have you been working on this?
These
Is it?
type of visualization
Yeah,
projects?
yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's a great question because I did it for my PhD and postdoc. So I mean, getting up to a decade or so. But maybe to add a little bit more to my answer here, what we've actually found out is like with these visualization tools, we use video game software to create it. So like we're really just kind of scratching the surface and the types of things that you can do with it. I describe them as visualizations, but more and more we're kind of turning them into like a whole multifaceted tool, something that allows people to look at the visualizations, but then also pop up systems maps. And now we're even exploring things like little narrative elements too, to kind of give people a richer sense of what these futures might look like under different development paths and strategies. So yeah, we've done these things in terms of tools for watershed management, the context of parks management, food systems development, building development, and yeah, still trying to explore a lot of the different applications there.
Wow, yeah, that seems endless. That's wonderful. Yeah. And your presentation make me think of Cristina Figueres back a few years ago when she mentioned that COP actually were looking at those kind of local actions, right? The local stuff doing at the municipal level or with government or institution to kind of bring it up to the top and understand what works and what doesn't. So I'm sure we'll talk about it more. So thank you. And I think, Julie, I'll just advance it to your slide. Perfect.
Thank you. These events are always so interesting and so much fun. So, I mean, Royal Roads is not a giant institution. It's rather small and beautifully situated for those who haven't come to the campus. But Rob works right down this little lovely library road in the middle of the forest. And I always learn so much, about what colleagues are doing. And it's really exciting. So yeah, my name's Julie McArthur. I'm also a Canada Research Chair, which essentially means that the government of Canada, through its granting funding agencies, helps support the work of Canada Research Chairs in universities across the country to kind of focus their research and really focus on research. So Rob and I both teach into different programs, but we're like more research active than the average academic, let's say, right? Which is really interesting because we get to spend a lot of time asking super interesting questions and helping students kind of understand what that looks like. So at Royal Roads University, I teach into the Doctor of Business Administration. There was a question in the chat about doctoral programs. There's two, there's a Doctor of Social Sciences and a Doctor of Business Administration, which kind of focuses on the management and leadership side of things. So I teach a research methods class into that. And then there's also this future of capitalism class that actually draws students from across the university. So from School of Environment and also the MBAs, so Master of Business Administration, and some of our leadership students. And we look at these big systems questions. So my background, even though I'm in the School of Leadership and Management, is really a political economist. So I'm really interested in questions about how power and agency and institutions like structures, how these intersect to create either livable worlds or not so livable worlds, like worlds that lead us to kind of collapse and degradation. And so this is where the connection is to COP30, because every year, you know, these kind of come around, these grand meetings where governments of the world get together and they strategize and they negotiate. We have this debate, is this useful? Is this getting us to the world that we collectively want or need for kind of basic life support? But beyond basic life support, I'm really interested in questions about human well-being and flourishing, right? Not just like how do we survive, which is super important. But we're hiring a number of people here at Royal Roads, and the candidate's presentation was just actually on the connection between mental health and loneliness and climate change, right? Which is just fascinating, right? But the idea is this isn't just about can you survive, but this connection between body and earth and people and systems. You know, it gets really messy, but it means that you can ask questions about climate change from every disciplinary angle, right? Which is really quite interesting. So I have yeah, anyhow, I'll stop there for now. But I love that we're having this conversation because we all the time when the COPs come up is like, are they useful? Are they getting us anywhere? And one thing Rob and my work, and you'll see from my presentation, shares is this focus, and it's so important at Royal Roads, on community-centered, community-based engagement as a tool to answer really big questions and address really big challenges around the world. So feel free to advance to the next slide. One of the areas, you'll see these like hands holding solar panels here. A lot of the area, the research I work with students and with colleagues around the world is looking at the transitions to new energy infrastructure. So from less fossil fuel, less greenhouse gas emitting to cleaner sources of energy. But the kind of power and ownership element that I bring to this work and colleagues of mine, we work in an area called energy democracy. So it's looking at how groups of people, non-traditional actors who aren't dominating the current incumbent energy system, how different ownership structures maybe change the priorities and activities in the sector. So how a wind farm that's owned by the people who live next to it operates differently, right? Do people, are they more likely to approve the wind farm? What other co-benefits does it have if it's owned locally versus if it's owned by an international company or a local private company or the BC Hydro equivalent, which is our provincial kind of electricity operator. So I'm really interested in these questions about how ownership matters for the distribution of benefits and how people then perceive and are able to actually meet their basic needs. So this map that I'm showing here is based on a recent project we completed earlier this year. And this was with some students, former students actually in the Masters of Environmental Management program, and also some doctoral students I'm working with across the country. And what we're mapping here is energy cooperatives in Canada. So cooperative is a very particular legal form of business that's based on a set of international social movement principles around the primacy not only of capital, like having money, but that each person gets an equal vote in the governance of the company, right? So your control of the company doesn't matter whether you own half the shares, which is a more traditional corporate structure. So we're really interested in how these like non-traditional corporate structures that usually align with this language around people before profit or something like that, how we can structure economic organizations to do things. You see cooperatives in healthcare, elder care, funerals, all across the Canadian economy, but they're really kind of an understudied aspect of how we might start to see new ways of meeting kind of social value and purpose and addressing really thorny challenges. So this is a map of energy cooperatives. You can't just go online and get this information from government statistics. It really takes a ton of, so our research assistants were trolling websites, we're building off databases. One I collected more than 15 years ago, others more updated ones. And this kind of maps where these organizations are across the country. And what we did is we separated them into, okay, which ones are generating electricity, renewable electricity? And if so, is it solar or is it wind or is it geothermal? Are they involved in moving electricity from one place to another? Because another area of the energy transition looks at, instead of big giant transmission lines, which are expensive and also have a lot of people opposing where the lines are there ways to build little microgrids connecting houses and universities and building more resilience at the local level? And so we were wondering, are cooperatives involved in this kind of work? And we also mapped others that are involved in things like installation of retrofits. Does it matter if your heat pumps are installed by a cooperative versus another kind of company? And we can't answer that question without knowing where they are and what they do. And it's hard to find. So this data set allows researchers across the country to start asking these kinds of more interesting questions, right? So it's online and it's publicly available now, and people can download it and look at it and start asking these other questions. So yeah, one of the things we found with our data set is that not only are cooperatives sort of understudied, but there's so little information about what they're doing in the electricity sector. Like a lot of people don't know, there's actually an oil refinery in Saskatchewan that's owned by the co-op retail stores. When you go to a gas station, the co-op gas stations, well, that is actually a co-op owned oil refinery. So that's kind of interesting. So they aren't just active in the renewables sector or the electricity sector, they're also active in other kind of energy area. So that's one research project that I've been involved in, and aggregated the kind of power generation that comes from the co-op sector can power about, I think we found around 150,000 homes or something like that. Some of these projects are partnerships with private sector, but we only focused on mapping those where the cooperative had at least 50% control. So this isn't a giant private sector project with minimal cooperative participation, of which we have that. But internationally, we've seen that this community ownership, the community control, community decision-making, and actual asset ownership is a really powerful lever for trying to kind of take economic returns and put them back into schools and hospitals and make sure that the people using it aren't energy poor. And I'll just say one more thing about this. And I used to work in Aotearoa, New Zealand for a number of years. And there's this whole literature because of the way that the houses are built there and the climate and whatnot called functional crowding. And it's essentially where you may live in a 3-bedroom home or apartment, but you all sleep in one of those bedrooms because you cannot afford to heat the rest of the house, right? And it really gets to these really important issues of not just income and infrastructure, like how we build things, but you might even have the infrastructure, but you can't use it because you can't afford it, right? So there's this really socially entangled and economically entangled way to look at whether moving to a low carbon economy or society is going to work for everyone. So our data set is one of these projects. Feel free to move to the next slide. I don't think that's the next slide. Oh, did you click on it? Yeah. So there's an atlas in ArcGIS that people can play with, and you can sort and you can look at all the different things. So we found essentially, like I said, when you break down where cooperatives are active in this area, there are about 231 active projects. So my research assistants were trolling through all these websites trying to find, okay, wait a minute. Did they used to own it? Do they currently own it? Did they sell it? Did they announce they were going to build something and then it never got built? So the data collection is really, really kind of messy, but kind of interesting in this area. So we only mapped the operational ones. They actually got built. And then we looked at what they actually own. This is just the generation ones. So generation from water, hydropower, solar, biomass, and biogas. And I can't remember what that blue one that doesn't seem to have anything is. All right, next slide. And this is just a picture of me in Denmark. It's very fun. So I do a lot of kind of international comparative work. So like I said, in New Zealand, but a recent study I'm looking at isn't just this map of energy cooperatives. We're trying to understand the policy setting. So a lot of my work looks at how local level projects get up and running, what they do, what the implications are, but also how do government rules and regulations either support or constrain the ability of these organizations to operate. So this was a research trip that I did to the UK and Denmark, where I was looking at policies there that facilitate these same kinds of organizations. So in the background, there is an offshore wind array just off the coast of Copenhagen. And that one is owned half by a cooperative and half by a municipal utility. And the cooperative and the people that own it were able to debate and discuss the design of it, which is usually left to engineers or folks outside. And it changed kind of the perception and how much people were willing to kind of accept the project. So they made it into kind of a swooping kind of line, as opposed to these three straight lines. And it's a tourist attraction. The co-owners from the local community get to go out on zodiacs and like climb. The kids go up and they learn about the technology. So this is where I was talking about things like co-benefits. There are all these benefits around learning about the way things work when you have a stake in it. Is really different than when something else owns it and it's part of like a gated off area you don't have access to. But yeah, we found it in Canada, there's this really huge geographic concentration, but I'm working with a number of colleagues across the country through a group called Community Energy Co-ops Canada to really work at the policy level to understand what the policies are around the world that actually support this and what that might look like in different provinces across Canada. So we're running a series of workshops over the next year and a half to really study this area to find out what kinds of rules and regulations. Are they financial? Are they informational? Do we need to prevent certain things in order to kind of enable these actors? Because it's not a level playing field, right? The big energy companies are big for a reason. They have a lot more financial assets, but a lot more connections to policymakers to kind of shape the rules of the game in their benefit. And this is where that power element comes in. So feel free to go. I think that might be the last slide. But that kind of community energy democracy is one of the big areas that I'm really interested in. Also the kind of comparative international policy piece. And I'm going to stick in the chat another project I've been working on over the last couple of years, and it's called the Canadian Climate Policy Partnership. So in the Canadian Climate Policy Partnership, we've developed like a searchable database of all provincial and federal climate mitigation policies. That's also open access. And essentially what it's showing is that in Canada, there's this huge veer towards using carrots, like doling money out instead of sticks. And the policy language are like, are you incentivizing people or are you forcing them, right? And so there's this huge shift towards like, let's give money, but let's not restrict too much, right? Let's not tell oil and gas companies to not produce so much. And you're seeing this really start to come out in recent policy announcements in Canada even more strongly. So I'll stick the link to some of those public data sets in the chat, but thanks for listening. I'm keen to chat more about COP.
So exciting, and I love all the interaction in the chat. That's wonderful. So thank you for that. And yeah, I think one of my questions, and I'll keep an eye if anyone in the room have other questions related to COP30. But I think one question I ask you is, of course, what is your hope? Because I'm a positive person. But what are the challenges too that you anticipate with COP30? And I know we discussed yesterday, it can be a full hour discussion, but what would you say are kind of your maybe highlights or what you're looking forward for that conference in a few days, few weeks now? Rob, do you want to go first? Up to you, popcorn style.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the things that we're looking towards. I mean, maybe it might be worthwhile just to talk a little bit about what happened last year in terms of the main outcomes of COP29. And the big one was really just this idea of creating or committing climate finance to developing countries. Now, for folks that followed it, they found that the outcome was disappointing for many. There was still kind of a significant outcome. So it was about, I think, $300 billion that was committed to support developing countries. But then And this is in terms of their climate action, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation efforts. But the ultimate hope was 1.3 trillion. And I think there's still this kind of aspirational target for the 1.3 trillion. And then there's this other thing that often comes out of these, where you have the commitment, but then there's the how part, and the how part is still a big question mark, right? So it'd be interesting to hear if there actually was any sort of thinking around that, the how, on these types of on this time around, to see if there's like still kind of the will and commitment there, but also like whether we're actually going to see any sort of movement there. The other thing is we're coming up to the point where we're looking at mitigation targets through those NDCs, these nationally determined contributions. So that's the kind of thing that we're these are things that are, I believe, Julie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they go on a 5-year review period. One of the things that's going to come out of this is we'll get a real sense of like how committed people actually do feel. I mean, we know that we've had a government change in the down south, which is the second biggest emitter in the world in terms of country emissions, and the commitment towards reducing emissions is not super high. So how does that make other people feel in terms of wanting to review their mitigation targets, and how ambitious do they want to be? There's this other flip side of it too, where there's going to be a lot more talk about adaptation planning, and I'm going to speak from kind of my conversations at the local level. The conversation over the last maybe, I'm going to say like 10 years of being kind of involved in this research field has really kind of shifted a fair bit from what should we do for mitigation efforts, and even think about mitigation efforts in that integrated planning way, to like, how do we become resilient and how do we adapt? We're not necessarily going to see that the ambitious 1.5 degree minimum future, or like capping future for global warming that we talked about and we had excitement about back in the Paris Agreement days. So what does this new world look like, and how do we adapt and become resilient to it? So that's kind of a conversation we're going to see, or I see at the local level, and be interesting to see then what's going to happen at the global level in terms of supporting those climate adaptation planning efforts.
This is like, I'll jump in there, but like, I think, is it what we want to see, right? What we hope for? Because it's really challenging. I mean, I think we got into this the last time we had one of these talks. There's very good reason that we need these global discussions, because there's no global government regulating for everyone. You need some sort of coordination, like an intergovernmental forum for governments to strategize and plan, to announce what they want to do. And so we can hold them to account. So there's this informational benefit to it. There's the strategic benefit of having a forum for conversation about this stuff. But I think the academic literature on like the contribution of the COPs to global climate governance is not terribly positive, right? I mean, to Rob's point about the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, yes, absolutely, they go in these 5-year cycles. One of them is due in 2025. A ton of countries haven't submitted theirs yet. So one of the things at the COP that they're going to be talking about is, hey, submit your plan, which seems really basic. So for those of us who are genuinely motivated by trying to address the climate crisis, it is continuously challenging to take a deep breath and say we can't even get a plan submitted, right? Because once they submit the plans, then they become subject to people saying, did you meet your plan? And guess what? They're not meeting their plan. Like, not even half the countries, especially from the big emitters, are meeting the plans they make. And even within those NDCs, there's a distinction between the promises that are conditional and unconditional. And the conditional are like, okay, if China does this, I'll do that, right? And almost none of those are met because the conditions are set so they cannot do it. But the unconditional ones that are like, we're going to reduce our emissions by X% by 2030. We're also generally failing in those. Not every country, but the on track is not good. So that's what provokes a lot of people to say, meh, COP. It's so much resource for these failures. I don't fall completely into that though. So my hope is that the conversations continue about how to meet them. My hope is also we can do some naming and shaming, which has a value, right? We can do it without the COPs, but it's very useful, I think, to kind of pull back the curtain on what's happening here. So a lot of the academic research has increasingly seen that who gets to be in the room. So this COP in Belém, there was a lot of hope for it to be like the Indigenous COP. The COP where, I mean, it's in the Amazon, it's in Brazil. I was at this Women in Climate event a few weeks ago, which had women from all around the world, Indigenous activists and whatnot, and it was brilliant. And they're planning like this Indigenous march to Belém. But with all that said, COPs always exclude these kind of social movement actors, right? It's very, very difficult to get the social movement actors in the room. Who's in the room in the negotiations? Who gets the pass that gets through all the security gates? Those are the industry leaders often, and obviously the negotiators. But even with the countries, and I'll kind of stop here, and I know this is my hope. My hope is that it can be more inclusive than it's shaping up to be, right? There's my hope. Because right now, a lot of the developing countries have submitted kind of protests essentially to the organizers saying, we can't even afford to show up at this one. The UN is sending those people. The hotel rooms are, we were talking about $500 to $1,000 a night, right? This is not inclusive. And I think this climate strategizing at this high level, where only those who can afford to and who are already connected to the corridors of power are making the plans, is a recipe for disaster. So that's my
No, that's, I mean, okay, yeah, that's good. And actually, Nancy, can I just jump in here too? Because I'm seeing a question in the chat from Teresa, and Julie, sort of getting back to your comment about what do we actually hope for, right? So, and like, what is it? If I were to, I don't think I'm going to see this, but what I'd actually hope for, Teresa, you're talking about this question around, the fear mongering that it's too late. It's this too late part that seems to kind of bother me quite a bit. I mean, it's this, we've been set from the Paris Agreement when there's still a lot of hope and action to meet this 1.5 degree warming target with, that's an ambitious target with ensuring that we're under 2 degrees. And if we, pass that, then there's this too late piece, right? And, I would like people to start engaging with other possible futures rather than this idea is like, are we going to exceed that and then we're done? Because, when you look at the IPCC's, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's modeling efforts, even in the best case scenarios, which is just not really super likely right now, is that we do actually exceed 1.5 degrees. And then towards the end of the century, we kind of dip below and get back to like 1.4, right? And then in other cases too, what we're actually also seeing is like the world shifts in a kind of a very socio-economic and political way, right? So sometimes we might be on this kind of moderate sustainability path. Other times, like right now, it feels like we're in an SSP3 scenario, which is like kind of regional rivalry where things are not cooperative. But then that changes. It's not just one trajectory, right? So like I kind of want us to get out of this headspace of that once we exceed these targets that we're trying to keep under, then we just it's too late, because that's where the giving up attitude comes in. And I'm kind of engaging more and more with communities of like, well, what if these futures look radically different? Then what does your local community look like? What do food systems look like? What do transportation systems look like under those futures? It's not just like, the film stops and then we don't keep going on. It's a very different future, and I think it's worthwhile to actually start talking about what those look like.
Absolutely. I know there's some questions, but I have to jump in on that because I think that's also why I end up where I am in my research trajectory. I genuinely think it's important what happens at these negotiations, but all of it comes home to someone's local area. And that doesn't mean all we focus on is the local area, because localities are embedded within regions, which are embedded within countries, which are embedded within, the globe, which is embedded within, et cetera, right? So this multi-level perspective is so much more nuanced than what they do there is all determining or what we do here is all determining. But I love this approach of like building out alternative systems at the same time as acknowledging the one that you are in, right? That the kind of fatalism and that comes with, okay, well, if they don't get to an agreement that's binding, then we're done. We're not. There are always like this infinite succession of presence that we can be part of and decisions. And I think the kind of local community-based work embedded within bigger regimes and networks is where we see change every time. So I just did an interview with Catherine McKenna as part of this book on like feminist climate policy. She was the former Minister of Climate Change, and her critics called her Climate Barbie. It was horrible, right? But her approach was, even within being the Minister of Climate Change, she was like, I had these targets, I was trying to bridge strategic divides, we were trying to push, things weren't working. But she's involved in all of these networks. Like, one of them is Women Kicking It On Climate. Like, there's so many people all around the globe, these Indigenous activist group, who are pushing at the COPs, who are having meetings and strategizing about how to push their governments. Like, even without success in the tick boxes I want to see, or my disappointment with Carney's recent kind of priorities and announcements, there are people doing amazing work pushing back on all of this at all of these levels. And I think that is something important to just join into. There's so many areas that change can be made. It's not this binary of, even on the 1.5, we passed 1.5 last year in annual measures, but you can measure it in very different ways. We passed it on monthly measures before, right? If you look at it based on a 5-year average versus the annual average, like, there's always more nuance that you can address and ways to get stuck in.
Wow, yeah, I really like that. That's a very, both of you just answer a lot of questions at once. So that's amazing, because you're right, there's hope, but also there's kind of the realistic side too. And it's good to know that we kind of need a bit of everything, right? I don't know if you want to take a minute to look in the chat. There's so many kind of interesting questions. I don't know which one you want to pick, because I think my last one was about, like, people in the Zoom room, like when we're motivated to do something, like it can be to take a program at Railroad and work with one of your projects, or like be involved with so many of our faculty and instructor doing amazing work, or maybe like, what would you say we can look at as well with COP30? Like, what would you recommend watching or doing, or is it like raising awareness with our friends and colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, well, I could certainly speak to the programs at Rural Roads aspect of it. Yes, there was a question, and forgive me, it's a little further up the chat, but there was a question about someone talking about their background and expertise, and just wondering if how or if they can get involved in this type of this field and this work. One of the things that Leslie King, who's the head of the Science and Policy and Climate Change grad cert, and myself talk about when we talk about this grad certificate program, is that we in the program we definitely introduce you and expose you to the science of climate change, but you don't have to come in with a science background. What we have found is that all walks of life have some sort of contribution or role when it comes to climate action, and just engaging in the topic of climate change. We are okay, all right, good. All right, so sorry, just I'm gonna rail myself again after being the recording stop piece. Yeah, so what I was talking about was what we talked about in terms of the graduate certificate in the science and policy of climate change. If you don't think that this program is for you because it might be too science heavy, please think again. We have people that come from all different backgrounds and disciplines, and we designed the program in a way that we allow people to explore different topics and research that is pertinent to their expertise, also their profession, and just their personal interests. So we've had a whole variety of different research projects that people have done in our classes. People have looked at, like, the spiritual dimensions of climate change, to, like, the practicalities of implementing different sort of green energy projects and facilities, to things like nature-based solutions. So you can come from a lot of different angles, and I think trying to engage in some of these programs with that thinking that it's such a highly interdisciplinary field, you can kind of figure out what your role is in this topic, and where you might fit in terms of thinking about climate action. Yeah. Yeah, Julie, I don't know if you had anything to add there.
I always have something to add, but I also don't want to take up all our time. I was kind of looking through the chat a little bit. I think I think some of the points are about the importance of this. And okay, again, how do I get involved, right? And I guess my answer would be that there are so many ways to approach this problem, like Rob has already kind of mentioned, that we need to understand how to structure businesses differently so that they are not so kind of all-consuming of people, right? In terms of burnout and also in terms of resources and materials. We need to understand the psychology of this stuff, what actually makes people change, right? Countries as well are not black boxes. It's not a thing. It's a collection of people in a collection of institutions, like buckets that have rules and norms and all the rest of it. And so we need to understand that. That's like political social science work, right? Like there are countries in the world that are leading on this stuff. Costa Rica is one, right? There are countries that are embedding the rights of nature into their constitutions. There are countries like Aotearoa, New Zealand, where rivers have personhood and have, mountains have personhood. And what that means in practice is having like committees actually of people, yes, they represent the rights of the river, not just the human interest to extract things or pollute things into it. So all of this is to say that this kind of multidisciplinary and multi-perspective angle on climate and environment more broadly, I think is really, really valuable. So whether it's through a certificate or whether it's through joining a local nature group or whether it is getting involved in the political party, right? Or, I mean, there are so many intervention leverage points. I think the key is to find where your passion and interests lie, because all of it can help address climate change, right? Like we need people on school boards and we need people running for office and we need people in business organizations saying, strategically, is it a great idea to double down on the resources that are kind of destroying the planet? So I think that's a real opportunity and a neat way to study. I think Royal Roads is I haven't been here for a very long time, like a few years, but I think it's really interesting because there's just been this restructuring to actually bring most of our programs in schools under one faculty, which for those of you who don't know much about academia is pretty radical. So the whole idea here is interdisciplinarity, how we can all complement each other in this. So yeah, there's a lot of intervention points. I heard something really wise though from a colleague of mine in Ireland. He's like an eco-socialist, right? So really interested in and how power and ownership affect kind of environmental outcomes. And he said, when you're getting involved in this stuff, it's really important to think about it. It's not it's not a sprint and it's not a marathon, it's a relay race. And so this relationality of like, okay, you cannot do it all. You need to find a team of people that you can pass off when you go, like, need to focus on something else or someone gets sick or that's not your area of expertise. And so I think that's really useful when you're thinking about how to study it too, right? Like you need to really think about yourself and your interests and your passions and your networks and, find the intervention point that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and that intervention point. I mean, I saw a couple different comments in here about trying to figure out how do we shift people's priorities from things like defense or economic development. And there's another comment and question about this idea of like how do we just not just do adaptation and start thinking about addressing the problems around fossil fuels. I just kind of wanted to mention that, like, a lot of the sort of strategies and interventions that you can implement. This is the reason why I often will look at this through this integrated planning lens, right? What we're trying to do, and when people talk about adaptation and becoming more resilient to climate change, it involves things like what Julie was presenting on earlier about coming up with new ways of generating energy locally for things that are not just in terms of getting away from fossil fuels, but it's for localizing energy, right? And coming up with a more stronger energy resilience in the face of the fact that you probably don't want supply chains on these kind of like fossil fuel sources to like where you're going to actually burn and use them. There's other things that come up too, like the idea of green infrastructure for adaptation. I mean, these are things, sure, they're great for carbon sequestration, but it's also great for quality of life. And having people in a community where they can walk along greenways, you're doing good things for ecological connectivity. You're doing good things for adaptation. You're doing things for climate change mitigation. It's the importance of understanding through the integrated lens. And And truthfully, I do get hope that I see more and more that communities are understanding these things. Like local communities are understanding it. A lot of the NGOs that I work with understand it as well too. It's sometimes it can be hard to implement and like get that message across to everyone because it requires thinking about the connections of these different strategies. But yeah, I mean it is going to be the way forward, and I do actually see a lot of progress at the local level at least that people understand that when you do a strategy, it's not supposed to do just one thing. It's supposed to, be something that's wonderful for, or help the well-being of the ecosystems that support us and, our human well-being too.
Very true. Thank you, both of you. And yes, some people say we need a follow-up discussion, and I agree with that. And I think this is the beauty of railroad programs too. It's kind of those discussions that we have in the classroom, online or in person, right? And then you have like-minded people and you do teamwork. So you get to exchange a lot because what I hear a lot doing student recruitment is people say climate work can be very lonely and you feel alone and you feel that you need to do it all, as Julie, you said. But yeah, coming to a program or something, you meet people and then you can explore different points of view, and it's very a rich experience. So unfortunately we'll have to, I guess, wrap it up because it's already 2 minutes. And thank you for everyone putting like more resources and videos and everything in the chat. I'll make sure to send that with the recording so we all have access to it, a list of our programs as well. And I just want to bring back just my last slide, because I know some of you are asking about more detail with the program, and I see that we have an enrollment advisor, Andrea, in the room today. But you can simply just scan this little QR code and get to book a one-on-one with one of us. So that would be like going through detail for the programs and what you want to achieve with your goals and stuff. But oh my God, Julie and Robert, like thank you so much. That was such a it's kind of a selfish panel that I put together because I wanted to get to know you and what you do and learn about COP30. But I've learned a lot, and I think we all need to stay curious and see how that goes. And hopefully, yeah, we'll have a follow-up conversation at some point.